Hello there. It is good to be here. That's right. I don't know if that's Carol or Gerald or both of you, but it is good to be here. I agree. I trust you can hear me. Is that right? Lovely, lovely. And Glay, I'm happy to see you on camera. I hope you're better. I trust you're better. That's great. That's great. Look at all these happy faces here. Hey, let's do that thing that we like to do, okay? Everyone, you're going to do it with me? Okay, I don't even need to explain it. I'm going to count to 3, and then you know what to do, okay? You ready? 1, 2, 3.
Hello. Hi there.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Shalom, shalom.
All right. Good. Nice to hear your voices. I think we could do better than that. Let's call that a practice round. Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you agree. Let's call that practice round. So everyone just get ready with your finger on the mute button, and then I'm going to count to 3, and then let's really just express how happy you are to see each other. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty ecstatic about it. So here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Hello. How are you?
Hello.
Shalom Aleichem.
What happened?
Never fails. It's so good. Well, it's nice to see you, folks. Nice to see you. This is number 3 of 6, and I'm especially happy because Rav Shmuley is here. He's back from his European trip, and I just want to, in his presence, want to express my gratitude to him for. I said to him I would like to teach. I imposed myself upon him, and said I would like to do a little bit of teaching, and he was generous enough to give me the opportunity, and I'm grateful for it. And I'll say this again in a few minutes, but you remember from the first session, right? Why practice Judaism? You remember, right? Wake up, do good. So when it comes to doing good, I don't know that there are many role models that come close to the kind of work that Shmuley does every day. I'm just thinking about the showers that somehow he raised, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars to provide showers for homeless people, so that they could clean themselves. It was just extraordinary, and all the other things that you see that he's doing all the time. So what an inspiration he is for me. And if you all don't know what I'm talking about, you should just look around online, and I'm sure there are many opportunities for you to get involved in the work that he's doing. Probably volunteering, supporting financially. I'm sure there's lots of opportunities. So I really feel fortunate to be able to say that in his presence. You may remember also at the end of the first session, I invited people to consider trying something, trying some kind of practice, something you might want to work on. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later as well. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter. It's okay. We're not in that kind of school that you don't get in trouble for not doing the homework. It's fine. But I want to loop back to that as well a little bit later. But before we kind of dive in, anything anyone wants to say, maybe in the time since we met last week, maybe something has come up, or a question or a reflection, or just want to create a little bit of space to see if there's anything bubbling up that people would like to share or talk about or ask. Okay, great. I guess that means we can move ahead. Is that yes? We're in agreement. We can move ahead. Okay. So look, this next hour, or next 51 minutes, you can spend it however you want. I remember I once had a teacher who said that he didn't mind if people fell asleep when he would teach, because at least he knew they got something out of the experience. So I think I heard that from Benny Friedman. I kind of agree with that. However you want to spend the time is fine. I'm over here, you're over there. But I do want to make an invitation to you, and that is that for the next 51 minutes, you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to perseverate about anything. You don't have to have your phone on and be distracted by it, constantly trying to get your attention. You don't even have to worry about something that's coming, later in the day or tomorrow. You don't have to do anything else. The only thing you have to do is just be here. Just be here. And the guarantee I'll make is if you can just do that for now 50 minutes, you're going to feel great at the end of it. And it will pay dividends, not because of anything I'm going to say, probably because of things that you'll say, but certainly not because of anything that I'm going to say, but just because you'll have given yourself a gift in the midst of a day to just be, to just see what comes up, to pay attention to what you hear, to see what thoughts come up in your mind, see how you feel about stuff, and just without any judgment or without any need to accomplish anything. Just you get to be here. So that's the invitation. Again, you could do whatever you want, but the invitation is just to be here. I promise you that that's all I'm going to do for the next 49 minutes. I'm just going to be here with you. I'm going to, I have an outline. You've seen, I have some slides, but I don't know what's going to come up. It's just, we're just going to kind of take it as it comes. So if you're wondering, what does this being here mean? Let me just help you out a little bit. Let me help you with a little bit of being here. So maybe right now, while you're listening to me talking, maybe you can also cast your attention down to your feet, and you can just feel your feet on the ground. My feet I have a nice cushion. I have a foot cushion down here because why not, And maybe you could just feel, like tingling along the bottom of your feet. You can feel the texture of the sock that you're in, or the shoe, or if you're on some carpet, or maybe you're on a hard floor. But just taking a moment and there, hey, I can feel my feet. Having that kind of interoceptive awareness, of what it feels like in your body at the perimeter of the meeting point of your body, and whatever it is beyond the body. So that's what I mean. Just being present to your body. And maybe if you're tired of paying attention to your feet, although they're endlessly fascinating, you could do the same thing just with your breath. You could just take a couple of moments and just find your breath. Like just take note of the fact that the body is breathing, right? You're not doing anything about it, really. Your body doesn't need you at all. It's just going along and breathing perfectly fine all by itself. And just try to find somewhere in your body where you can very easily locate your breath. You might find it in your abdomen. Maybe when you breathe in, you can feel your abdomen expand and then contract when you breathe out. If that's not working for you, you can rest your attention on your chest. Feel your chest rising as you breathe in and lowering as you breathe out. Or maybe right up here, feeling the air coming into your nostrils and back out again. And just, isn't that something? Isn't that something? You got another breath. So that's it. That's all I mean. It's just being attentive to how it feels while we're here together for the next 47 minutes. Okay. So let's begin. Let me pull up my slides here. So this is what we're doing. We're still here, right? Practicing Judaism in the 21st century, reading the Torah as a spiritual handbook. So we'll just do a quick review, session 3. So we're going to do session 2. Actually, we're going to do session 1 and 2 summary, just a quick summary of what we've done, very quick. And then we're going to get to the second and third part of part 2. Here it's the first and second part. We did the first part last week. So we're going to talk about rereading the Torah as a spiritual handbook. And we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about what does it mean to read the Torah? How do we read the Torah? And then we're going to say something about spiritual handbooks. What's a spiritual handbook? And then we're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to do practice 0. Practice 0 is a kind of a generic form of practice, but it also will serve as an example of how we're going to read some texts from the Torah in the next 3 sessions. So the way it's worked out, I thought all the material we're going to do in these 3 sessions, we'd cover in the first session. Okay, I misjudged that. So the way it's worked out is the first 3 sessions are kind of orientation, and the second 3 sessions will be the practice, So it's like when you read a good book, like a great fiction book, and you have to wait 2/3 in because the Easter egg is going to come. You have to wait. The Easter egg will come in session 4 when we do the practice itself. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's just review session 1 and session 2. So session 1, we covered 3 basic topics, right? Why practice? And I suggested the reason we practice things, there are many definitions of practice, but the reason we practice things is to become habituated to certain things and to cultivate skill. So to habituate ourselves to do them often, and to do them as a habit, to do them so that they become natural, they become part of our way of being. And skillful, yes, actually to become good at them. Yes, you can. I know it's not very popular these days to say these kind of things, but you can be better or worse at things. It's true. And now being worse at something, that doesn't make you a bad person, or no one should make you feel bad about it, but you can get better at things. So that's skillfulness, okay? So that's why we practice. Why practice? Judaism already covered it. Wake up, do good, right? You remember Jacob, right? Vayomer Yaakov, right? Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. Jacob said, right? Surely Adonai is in this place, and I didn't know, right? That's the kind of you might say the founding spiritual moment of the Jewish tradition. Yeah. So wake up. Something's happening here, folks. I'll tell you what's happening. We're alive, and it's not going to last forever. Right. So wake up. Now you're awake. What are you going to do about it? Okay, do good. That's it. That's it. If that person had come and asked me, to teach them the Torah standing on one leg, I mean, I have all due respect to, Akiva, who said, love your neighbor as yourself. And Hillel said, love your neighbor as yourself. And I also understand Shammai, kind of bonk him over the head and telling him to get lost. I understand that too. But I would give a different answer. I would say, if you want to understand the whole Torah standing on one foot, to boil it down, I would say, wake up, do good. That's it. Say ulmad, go learn. The rest is commentary. Okay, that's second. Third, what's special about the 21st century? Because the title is Practicing Judaism in the 21st Century. What's special about the 21st century is Oy, right? Which doesn't mean there hasn't been Oy in every century, at least for 70,000 years since the cognitive revolution, but we're in a very peculiar kind of Oy because climate change is real, and the threat to our species, let alone the thousands of other species that have already become extinct and will still continue to become extinct in the coming decades and centuries. But Oy, the 21st century is it's serious stuff. It's sobering. If you need sobering, it's sobering. So that was session 1. Any questions about that? Any, comment, reaction, points of clarification? Clear? Yes? Clear. Great. That's what I'm looking for. Clarity. You don't have to agree with me, but I'd like you to understand me. That's all. Okay. All right. Session 2. Session 2 was about the Torah. We spent the whole session pretty much talking about what is the Torah, and we shared, it was beautiful sharing. People shared what the Torah means to them. And we heard some really wonderful things about the way it informs our lives. And then we talked about the history. And I shared with you, to the best of my judgment, what I find to be the most convincing scholarly claim for the origins and the appearance of the Torah as we know it, the 5 books of Moses, and that it appeared, that it came into being, it was intentionally produced in the post-destruction and post-exile period, which is to say after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, sometime probably in the mid-5th century BCE, let's say 450, at the time of Ezra, okay? That was number 1. 2, it was in the context of imperial power that had a ruling influence over the land of Israel, in particular the Persian Empire and the Hellenistic Empire. And you may remember that the Persian Empire required those nations that it ruled over to have their own kind of constitution and law code, which created the conditions for the Torah to be produced as a book of law. And the Hellenistic culture was the first culture that revered books as a kind of status symbol of the culture. And so the Jews, the Israelites living under the Hellenistic rule, were influenced by that, and that's how the Torah became such a significant book, a document for the Israelites. So it was produced both in the wake of a profoundly traumatic experience that had happened, 3, 4, 5 generations before, profoundly traumatic. Remember, Josephus says 1 million Israelites were murdered during the destruction of the first temple. I think that's the second temple, actually, but the numbers are high. I think that's incorrect. He's not talking about the first temple, but still an enormously traumatic. You can just read the stories in the Hebrew Bible. Enormously traumatic experience, both the destruction of the central religious center and also the forced exile. That's number one. Number two, the influence of outside cultures, occupying forces, whose cultural influence was significant. And of course, we can think of parallels throughout history and across the world of peoples that live in those realities. And then the third piece was that the Torah was produced in a context in which the people who produced it needed to negotiate power, which was to say that the priesthood, remember, there's no monarchy anymore. The monarchy has been destroyed. Israelites are not sovereigns in their own land, okay? The priests are now essentially the power elite in the land of Israel. And they are required by the Persian Empire to have a constitution. The priests have their own scribal academy, which is filled with Levitical scribes. So they are, and Ezra is the primary liaison between the Persian Empire and the Israelites. So they're negotiating power with the ruling empire. And of course, you know what happens when people have power? They're also negotiating power between themselves and the Israelites, right? And just like if you read, the first and second books of Kings, you'll know there were good kings and bad kings. There were good priests and bad priests, right? I mean, these are political institutions, no less political than the American government, than any other government at any time. These are political institutions. And so those political interests, along with the influence of foreign powers, along with the echo of trauma, informs the production of this document, right? So that's the context in which it comes into being. Any questions there or clarification? Anything that anyone wants to say?
Hey, can I ask a question really quickly?
Yeah, of course. No, you could take as much time as you want.
All right, just this one's quick, okay? So the short version of it, though, is that I was talking to a student rabbi about the documentary thesis, and I was just wondering if, because the student rabbi was telling me no one listens to the documentary thesis about the Torah anymore, and then I was told by someone else, another rabbi, that people do. So I don't know if you have an opinion about that.
Sure. So just let me bring everybody in. So the documentary hypothesis is a scholarly thesis that was posed in the late part of the 19th century by Graf, Kuhnen, and most famously Wellhausen, Julius Wellhausen, in Germany. And the theory was that the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, in fact, but the Torah in particular, is made up of multiple documents that have been woven together over time. That we don't know who the authors were, but they're given these names, J, E, P, and D, and they're given those names because J stands for Jehovah, or Yud He Vav He, because they're sections of the Torah that have that special 4-letter name of God. E is for Elohim, which is another name of God. P is the priestly source, and D is the Deuteronomist, the book of Deuteronomy. And so, no, I think that the person you spoke to is mistaken. I don't think they are mistaken. Certainly in the 150 years since the documentary hypothesis was first proposed, a great deal, I mean, libraries of research have been written on the subject, and we do have increasingly sophisticated ways of thinking about the production of that document. The thinking now is certainly there are multiple voices in the text. I mean, you only have to. I mean, I don't know if it works as well in the Hebrew as in the English as it does in the Hebrew, but if you just read the book slowly enough, you just notice it. It's like unmistakable, right? You find vocabulary in some sections that doesn't appear in others, pacing, narrative style. There's no question about it. My sense is, and I'm only one person, and you know, if you have access to an academic library, just read anything coming out of Mohr Siebeck, Mohr Siebeck. That's like the place that's publishing the most contemporary scholarship on Bible studies, and their stuff is extraordinary and maybe hard to penetrate for people that are not familiar with the field. But anyway, my sense is that the debate is, do documents precede or come after the destruction? So there are some who think, like especially scholars of the priestly section, there are some who claim that the priestly section came before the destruction of the first temple, before 586. And there are those who say it came after. We know, and I remember last session, Andy and Sander made this point, we know that there are oral traditions that preceded the actual production of the document, no question. But it seems quite clear that somewhere in the middle of the 5th century, until as late as maybe 200 BCE, so we're talking like a 250-year process, people in the scribal academies are editing and re-editing and reweaving this document over time. It might be like thinking about, you know, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and then subsequent Supreme Court rulings, right? Like if you took them all together, right, it's really an extended multi-century long editing process of the Constitution, right? If you think of it that way. The difference is in this case is that they all got bound and published together in the Torah, right? You know, it's even a question, by the way, when the Torah even appeared in the way it did, in the way that we know it, because we know, for example, because of the materials they used at that time in the ancient Near East, you know, you couldn't have a scroll that was as long as the current Torah, because it wouldn't actually hold up. The weight of it would be too brittle, it would break down. So the reason there are probably 5 books is because there were 5 different scrolls. And so you could imagine different editorial teams working on different scrolls with different editorial voices, you know. So I think the documentary hypothesis is still very much the kind of consensus, broadly the consensus, with the recognition that at some point, so let's say the 3rd century, 200 BCE, at some point, there was a kind of completion of the editorial process. There was a kind of a final editorial stage. And you could say that maybe that final editorial stage was of a single mind, right? They had a certain set of editorial interests or agendas, or they had a style guide that they followed, you know. But as is clear from any even relatively close reading of the text, they did not iron out the various voices in the text. They're still very much present. I mean, I'll say one last thing. Just look for the contradictions, right? I mean, just read the story of Noah, right? Like the numbers are inconsistent. Sometimes it's 2 by 2, sometimes it's 7 by 7. Well, which one is it, right? Or read the story of Korach, you know, later on. So clearly, the editors at the time who didn't have the advantages of, let's say, modern word processing, when they were weaving various narratives together, they just didn't catch some stuff. They just missed some stuff, you know, because the editing was, maybe by their standards, it was the very best editing you could imagine. But if you gave it, well, who just died? Robert Gottlieb, right? Like if you gave it to Robert Gottlieb, right, the editor of Caro, and right, if you gave it to him, like I think he'd probably have something to say about the editorial job that was done on the Torah. Like there was still room for improvement. You know what I mean? So is that enough?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, good. Anything else? Anyone else? There's, I'll say one other thing, Aglaia, if you're interested, there's also a website you might want to look at called Metatron, Metatron, and they're publishing some like a really like accessible. I don't mean you wouldn't. Don't take it as an insult. I just mean like you can read it short. You know, it doesn't require technical knowledge, but they're giving you a sense of like some of the thinking that's going on right now from like younger scholars, and I think that stuff is really super interesting, So, and actually, the question leads into really what I wanted to say next about all this. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that, the Torah is a document that appears in history. It comes out of and is in the context of a particular moment or set of moments in history, and it's impacted by those realities. And sometimes you can see it clearly and sometimes not so much. So, for example, like in the end of the book of Numbers, I don't know, in the 30s, chapters 30, 31, something like that, maybe later, there's a description of a war between the Israelites and Midian, the Midianites. And it's pretty horrific. And if you know this historical context, it doesn't take a leap to think, oh, this is how an oppressed people was expressing their rage against their oppressors, right? By constructing a story it's fiction out of whole cloth, right? I mean, this never happened. It didn't happen in history, but they're constructing a story where they are victorious over their oppressors. You can imagine that. The whole of this is beyond the Torah now. The whole of the book of Joshua is about that. And you can read the scholarship on that. The book of Joshua is a trauma-informed, like rage against the ruling power. I get that, right? I can get it and also say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be looking at that text as a kind of guide for how to live our lives, right? I mean, Deuteronomy says the same thing, right? Deuteronomy, when you come into the land of Israel, right, it says you should wipe out the 7 nations, right? Lo techaye kol neshama, it says, do not allow a single life, right, to be maintained. It's an explicit call for genocide. I'm not using that to scare you. That's what it is. There, by the way, maybe in human history, maybe the earliest call for genocide in literature, which is a very uncomfortable thing to consider. If that book is part of your spiritual heritage, right? It's in there. Now, of course, if I'm living in the land of Israel in the middle of the 5th century, or let's say 400, and I've been living under foreign imperial rule for 200 years, and my most sacred place had been destroyed by an imperial power 200 years ago, and who knows how many hundreds of thousands of people were murdered and all the rest of it, right? I understand that I might have that kind of rage, that I just want to, I get that. But that means but if we know that, we don't have to read these texts as all being certainly not normative, and not always possessing maybe the most human expression of how we feel. Sometimes when people do things that harm us, we want to harm them back. That's a kind of very natural human thing to do, but we're able to see that and have some distance and realize that, okay, that was the situation they were in. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to respond that way. Last thing I want to say, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, unless you're someone who has never experienced pain or trauma or suffering in your life, and if you haven't, I'd love to chat. It'd be nice to hear what that's like. There's some kind of mysterious learning that comes on the other side of pain, of distress, of trauma. And sometimes it takes a very long time. You might still be in the wake of an experience like that, and you're not at the point where you're able to feel like that the learning has happened. But I'm sure that probably everybody on this call can think of a time in your life when something very hard was happening. Something was very hard. In the moment of it, like first of all, you were consumed by it, but somehow, when you move past it and things settle down again, somehow you realize there was some kernel of wisdom in there that could be mined or could be excavated. And I don't know that I certainly don't think like that means we should seek out pain and suffering. I mean, that, it doesn't justify it, doesn't make it, necessarily good or okay. But it does seem to be a truth. And by the way, it's a truth in our tradition, right? The crescendo moment in the Torah is standing at Mount Sinai, right? No question about that. And the crescendo moment is God speaking to the Jewish people, right? The Israelites. And what's the first thing? The first thing that's uttered, Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, right? So this it's right there, right? That juxtaposition. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. Asher hotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt. It's like somehow you had to be in Egypt and come out of Egypt to be able to come face to face with Anochi Adonai Elohecha. You had to somehow, in the narrative, the person that wrote that story, right? Let's remember this now, right? These folks were writing the story to try to convey something. For the folks who were writing that story, I think they were trying to convey that from Mitzrayim, right? Mitzrayim, which we translate as Egypt, but of course Mitzrayim means the narrow place, right? From the narrow place, from the place where we're constricted, when we come out of that and we come back to a kind of sense of expansiveness, we can have those moments of Anochi Adonai Elohecha where we see the presence. We understand that in fact, our ability to recover from those experiences is inexplicable, is mysterious, and that is in and of itself the realization, right? So what I want to say, why am I saying all that, is that in addition to all of this kind of realia of the moment in time in which this document appeared, I'm also saying that one of the reasons we turn to it as a source of wisdom is that because it was born out of that place. It's actually because of the historical context in which it appeared that it is such a profound source of wisdom, right? Those are the people. I mean, you want to seek those people out. I remember I had it's like, sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump, I just showed up in all those places. I also like chocolates, but I had this extraordinary, it's like, as I'm thinking about it right now, it just came to mind. It's, I can't even believe it. I had the opportunity to be in a very small group, to have an audience with Nelson Mandela in the early 1990s. So he had been out, I guess, he came out in 86. I don't know if I've got my dates right, but he hadn't been out that long. He'd been out, it's a small group. He came to London and, 26 years, I think he was on Robben Island, right? And I'm not saying it was worth it. I don't know how to make that calculation. That's a kind of math that I just don't know how to do, but there was some deep wisdom in his presence. And I think that was somehow fashioned, as he was, picking away at the quartz, which would shatter and, made his eyes the way they look, and his hand, I shook his hands. It was like holding a piece of rock. It's just the hardest hands I've ever felt in my life. It was very unusual, but he had a kind of a wisdom. You can go on to the, Shmuli's done an amazing job. You go on to the learning library, like the people he's spoken to. I mean, it's like unbelievable. Just listen to the people who are over 75 years of age. Doesn't matter who they are. Just listen to them, okay. So that's the point, right? So what I'm saying is now, as we transition from, what we've been doing, which is like the history and the context and the whatever, what I want to move to now is kind of the wisdom, hopefully, not mine, but the Torah's. And what I want to say is that The wisdom comes through because of the crucible from within which it came into being, right? If you haven't already, this is the moment for you to just take a second and think about the crucible from within which you came into being. So that's the summary. So let's talk about this Torah thing. How do we read it, right? So, Jews are funny people, to paraphrase that line, everybody's funny. Jews are just a little bit more funny, just funny people. So Jews read the Torah in these very unusual ways. We actually read the Torah, but we don't really read it. It's very funny. So let me tell you what I mean first, right? First, we read it this way. We read it by chanting it. It's an unusual way to read. I don't know how many people on here engage in chanting the Torah on a Saturday or on a holiday. If you've ever done it, I love to. It takes me an enormous amount of time to prepare, so I don't do it very often. But I love doing it. It's an interesting way to read, right? Reading is chanting. And, I'm just going to move through these. I'm not going to add commentary, but as I'm going through, you'll think about your experiences of chanting or being present in chanting, right? So that's one kind of reading. And in case it's not clear, it should be. Of course, I'm using the word reading in a broad sense, but we do that with language, right? Like when we text someone, we might say, we'll write to them. Yes? So it's okay to use the word reading in this kind of broad way. So that's one way we read. Well, another way we read is same picture, right? Well, another way we read Torah is by listening to it. Most Jews who encounter the Torah encounter it by listening to it. So they read it by remote control, right? Somebody else reads it and they listen, right? Which, by the way, is kind of like reading, but you're just using another person's body to do it. Right? So reading is listening. It's an interesting way to engage with the text, right? Then we have reading as learning, right? People may be familiar with this as well. Like you go to some class or you go to a house of study or a Beit Midrash or a seminary, or you go to the synagogue and you're doing, I love the high-fiving. I can tell you, I spent 8 years in seminary. We didn't do a lot of that. I wish it's so much happier than my memory of being in seminary, but I had a great time, but it wasn't like this. It was very serious. We were very serious in seminary because we thought it was so important. But this kind of reading, right? The dictionaries are out and you're trying to like pull apart, what the text means. I remember when I was in seminary, the morning study period was 4 hours. And if you completed a line of text, one line of text in 4 hours, you felt like you had a great day. It's just this extraordinary, close reading, right? So that's another way. Then we have a type of reading, which is the type of reading that the least amount of people do, right? And that's reading as reading. How many people here, maybe everybody here is going to put their hand up, and say yes, but how many people here have picked up the Torah to read it like the way you read a book? Yeah, Glea, I'm glad you're here. It's really great. But the truth that is pretty rare. It's pretty rare. People don't read it, right? And there are these lovely ways you can read it. Harold Bloom and David Rosenberg, right? Go back to the documentary hypothesis, right? They peeled out the J section and they kind of translated it and wrote it with a narrative flow. And you could just read J, right? And this book on the right came out just in the last year. It's just magnificent. It's just magnificent. This is the P section, the priestly document, and it has a 50-page introduction that is the very best, I think, accessible introduction to kind of the scholarship of the Bible for a general reader, the best I've ever read. It's magnificent, right? But we never do that. Some people do, but very rarely, to actually read it as a reading book, right? It's just a funny thing, right? Okay. And then, of course, then we have this other type of reading as writing, right? Which is another way, right? Keep in mind, in the ancient Near East, right, the primary ways that people came into contact with the Torah was by listening. If you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, right, they would go to the marketplace and people would read it out loud and people would hear it, right? And that was for the general public. But for the elite, the priest and whatever else, right, the scribes, the way they encountered it was by writing it, copying it, right? They would copy it over and over again. They would write it out. So we have all these interesting ways of encountering the text, and I think just interesting to point that out, just to think about, well, what's going on there? There's a playful side of me, but also half serious, that thinks of all of these ways of reading but not reading, because remember, reading as reading is very rare, right? Okay, you ready? I'm going to say it, but and actually, as I'm thinking about it, it's like I'm realizing it's not so playful. I think I'm being pretty serious. I think there are all ways to actually avoid encountering the text. I remember when I was in seminary, I remember that the Rosh Yeshiva Chaim Brovender, right? Shmuley, you were with him, right? You learned at Brovender's, right? I remember him saying that he said, when you go to shul on Yom Kippur evening for Kol Nidrei, he said, sometimes they're singing the melody, people are crying sometimes. I've seen that. He's like, what are they crying about? I mean, if they read the text, they would. And he said, better that we don't translate it for them, because the emotion they're experiencing has nothing to do with the words, right? It probably has to do with sitting in shul with their bubby, when they were younger, or has to do with whatever it has to do with, right? Beautiful things, painful things, whatever it has to do with. Maybe the first time in the year they stopped for 5 minutes. And maybe just like the pain of living for a year, just whatever the reason is, right? And there's something about, prayer being in Hebrew that serves as a kind of prophylactic. It like protects us from what the words actually say, because if we really paid attention to what the words really said, it would be hard, right? So I'm playing off of that. I think there's something about the way we encounter Torah that like it saves us from having to confront the text, because sometimes it's great, sometimes it's just icky, sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's just boring, and like it's all that stuff, and sometimes it's just like it's from a culture 2,500 years ago, and it's like, what is this about, And so there's a reason why people don't read it as reading, because it takes a rare kind of person, and you can either take that as a compliment or as an insult, but it takes a rare kind of person. I'm being playful now. It takes a rare kind of person to be able to like put themselves through reading that thing. I mean, I wrote the darn thing, right? So you know what kind of person I am, right? I mean, I copied the thing out word for word. So, okay, I'm one of those kind of, but so what I want to say is I want to offer a kind of reading where we actually read the text, but we read it in a way where we can actually we can maybe confront it, whereas maybe we've been trying to avoid it. And the way to do that, I'm proposing, here's the Darren hypothesis. You may remember I said this last week. The way we do that is we will spend time asking, what does the text mean? Sure. But what we need to spend more time doing, and we won't do a lot of it in real time, because it's taken me 25 years that I've been working on it. I'm just giving you the short version. The way we'll get there is by asking ourselves, you may remember the question, asking ourselves, what would the person have had to have known to have written this, right? How can we take their perspective? Right? How can we shift our orientation, not to be looking at the text, but to actually move behind it and look through the text? That line when Moses says to God, show me your face. You know that line? And God says to Moses, nobody can see my face and live, right? But he goes past him and shows him the back of his head, right? God shows Moses the back of God's head. So there's lots of ways of interpreting that text. I don't profess to have the correct, I don't think there's any correct way to interpret it. But the way I like to think about it is like, if you can see the back of God's head, you can also see what God sees. You can see in the same direction, right? So there's something about reading a text, entering an art form as it might be, and even another human being, and like inhabiting their world for a little while, seeing it as they see it, hearing it as they hear it, smelling it as they smell it, as I blow out the candle in my garage, like just, what is that like? What is that like? So what I'm going to try to do in the next 3 sessions, we're going to do practice 0 to close it out, is I'm going to try to do that for you and a little bit with you. Okay. That's what we're going to try to do. Okay. Questions, comments, anything you want to say? Okay. Let's try to do practice 0 in 8 minutes. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Practice. Oh no. Good. Okay. I missed the section. Great. We'll say practice 0 till next time. That's great. We'll close with spiritual handbooks. Okay. So we have all these ways of reading the Torah. And I'm saying, this is the last part of the title, right? Practicing Judaism in the 21st century, rereading the Torah as a spiritual handbook. Okay. Spiritual handbook. Okay. So, I gave Shmuley the title, I don't know, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. But, I don't love the word spiritual. It's a kind of like, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not against it, but it's a little bit, I don't know what to do about it, but let me tell you what I mean by that. And this will give you just a last piece on how we're going to approach the text in the next 3 weeks. Here's what I mean by, I don't mean spiritual handbook, I just mean handbook. Here's what I mean by handbook. When I started on my, in the first session, you may remember I shared that some of the thinking about this class came out of this kind of intersection in my own spiritual life between Judaism and Eastern wisdom, Buddhism, meditative practices, right? I talked about that. One of the things I really enjoyed in my now 7-year encounter with Buddhism is the large variety of handbooks that exist in both Eastern and Western forms of Buddhism. Handbooks, and that's literally what they are. They're manuals. They're manuals. They tell you, do this. This thing might happen. Do this other thing. This other thing might happen. When I did it, here's the experience I had. Like they're just wonderful. They're wonderful because they, in ways that I think Judaism and certainly Judaism, I know it best, but maybe some other traditions too, in the ways that some other religious traditions don't do quite so well. They invite you into what it might be like to have the experience they're telling you about. And the way they do that is by describing it from their own perspective. They're showing you what it looks like from where they stand. And then providing very clear instructions that you can try. You could just try them. And of course, the Buddha was very clear. Try it for yourself, right? I mean, try it for yourself. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, whatever. It's up to you, right? Be a light unto yourself, I think was the apocryphal dying words that came from his mouth, right? Be a light unto yourself. So I loved that. And I think I probably loved that because if I hadn't, when I was 18, gone to Israel to study in seminary, I would have gone to university and studied electrical engineering. So there's a part of me, I have a kind of an engineer brain, and I like that. Like, I can't cook from scratch for the life of me, but you give me a recipe, I'll do a pretty good job. Just follow the steps, And if the first time it doesn't go so well, I just can pay attention and do it again and do it again and do it again. So that's what these handbooks in the Buddhist tradition do. And they kind of make a promise that they deliver on. They say, I mean, if you're in, I should say, maybe that's arrogant, but in my experience, the thing they said that they were offering seemed to be, if you stuck with it, you were able to realize it. And I found that to just be wonderful. I found that to be wonderful. And it made me think about Judaism, and that Judaism lacks that to a large extent. In the Orthodox Jewish community, or for those parts of the Jewish world that follow halakha, Jewish law, you could say there really is a practice, there really is a handbook. Right? I mean, there's literally a handbook. There's a book that documents like how you should behave and act pretty much for every waking moment of your life. Most Jews are not living a halachic lifestyle, are not living a life according to Jewish law. Most Jews are not Orthodox, of course. And even from the perspective of Jewish law, there's not that much about like what's the inner experience like, So, for example, I don't know, keep Shabbat, Okay, I get it. Keep Shabbat, let's take the traditional version, don't use electricity or don't carry things or don't cook. Oh, don't light a fire. Okay. What's supposed to happen in here? What's my perspective of mind when I'm in that state? How am I supposed to, what experience am I looking for? How do I know if I'm doing it well? It could be, you could say, from the halachic perspective, from the perspective of Jewish law, the way you know if you're doing it well is either you follow this stricture or you don't, right? Either you turn on the light or you don't turn on the light. Could be. But for most other folks who are interested in Judaism, who interact with Jewish life, who are interested in spiritual exploration, there's more that's been published in the last 40 years, but there's precious little. And there's very little that I see in terms of the foundational text of the Jewish tradition, which is the Torah, which is how could you read the Torah as a kind of a handbook that might offer us practical guidance, not only for states of mind and states of being that we might want to cultivate, but also very clear practices for how to do it. And so that's what I mean by rereading the Torah as a spiritual handbook. I'm just going to take you back, and we'll close with this, to that quote from Sylvia Boorstein. You remember Sylvia Boorstein was quoting Jonathan Omerman about why Jews are so interested in Buddhism, right? And she said that the Buddhism that had come to the West offered a clear explanation for suffering and tools for the direct personal realization of a peaceful mind. That's quite an offer. A tradition says, we'll give you the tools for the direct personal realization of a peaceful mind. But that's what it offers. It required practice, not affiliation. You don't need to send anybody a check, right? Or you do have to, although you probably did have to pay for this class. It was a great spiritual path that promised transformation, right? And so what I learned when I kind of brought my attention back from seeing things through that lens back to the Torah and the Jewish tradition as a whole, I realized that that one could do the same thing. And let me be clear here as we close, not because I'm trying to save Jews from Buddhism. I don't care about that. I'm a syncretist. I hope you are too. I wrote a book making the case that we all are anyway, whether you like it or not. But I do think people will benefit from clear and simple guidance. Like if you're taking the class, probably, I mean, maybe you're just a friend and you're just trying to, be supportive of me, and that's great. I'll take that. But for other people, like you probably took the class, whether you're aware of it or not, because you're looking for something about that title. So what I'm here to say is, in the next 3 sessions, I'm going to try as best I can to give you a little bit of that. And I don't know if I can guarantee a clear and peaceful mind after 3 sessions. But I think what I can guarantee is if you try the things I'll offer you, you'll be moving in that direction. It's 2:00. Any last words from anyone else? Question, comment, heckle? Yeah, Glea.
Right, this might be a heckle, and I'm really sorry. Okay, but okay, this might be a heckle. I'm really, really sorry about this, though. But all right, so when we're talking about handbooks and structures and stuff like that, though, okay, I'm a little crazy, so bear with me on this one, though. But the way that I'm kind of seeing things, I was once classically trained as a singer, and Baroque music, the composer would give you, like the basic structure, but you have the A section, you sing the basic structure, B section, you sing the basic structure. You go back to the A section and you ad lib and you just improv a bunch of really high notes and trills and stuff like that. And it's really up to the singer. So is there a way, just hypothetically though, that you could use the Torah that way also?
I love that. I love that. Yes. First of all, the example is very apt. because the musical analogy is just perfect. I mean, I got a couple of stringed instruments here. You spend a lot of time, on chords and scales, and then if you're lucky, you get to a point when, and I learned this from who's not here with us today, from my guitar teacher and dear friend Sander. You get to some point where you realize, like, it's all one key. You could play any note, right? So you because you just, something happens. That's a longer conversation. So yeah, the same is true for the Torah. So there's and this is true for any spiritual path. That line, this is a wonderful line from the Buddhist tradition, right? If you see the Buddha by the side of the road, kill him. You know that line? If you see the Buddha by the side of the road, kill him, right? So there's a lot of possible, meanings there, but I think the meaning, to me at least, is quite clear, and that is there's only one spiritual path, and that's yours. That's the only one there is. It's yours. All the other ones are ultimately ways for you to figure out which ones are not yours. And they may help you along the way. They may help you along the way. But if you stick with one of the other ones, then you'll never find your own one. So then you're just living out someone else's, kind of spiritual experience. Once a person has come to that place where they inhabit themselves, the reality of their lives, the truth of what they are, then the Torah, but it's like it just becomes like the neck of the guitar. Like you can understand. Like, let me give you an example. I said before, about all the complex nature of the Torah, the various emotions and all the stuff that's going on. At the same time, once you get to that place, let's call it mastery, fluency, with the text, you start to understand that when Maimonides in the 12th century, in the 8th of the 13 principles of faith, said that every single letter, right, of the Torah, every word, every verse, every chapter, every book was dictated directly from God to Moses at Mount Sinai, you understand, of course, that's the case. Of course, that's the case, right? Because, well, maybe I'm not being clear. It's not a historical. He's not making a historical claim. He's making a spiritual claim. But by which I mean to say that perspective is one, and I'm sure that Maimonides knew this, is the same perspective as realizing that every person is a divine utterance. Everything is a divine utterance. All of this. Who knows what it is? I have no idea what it is, but all of this is mysterious and miraculous, and the capacity to see that all the time allows one to open any text on any page and read any verse or any sentence or any paragraph and have that realization. Absolutely. When you said last week, right? You said, like, sometimes you just open it and there's like an answer there. There's guidance there, right? Well, allow me to superimpose my perspective onto you. You can reject it, and I know you will. Like, that's not the Torah. That's you.
That's fine.
It's you. You have a certain kind of a relationship with that document that allows you to you have confidence or trust or whatever it is that allows you to see, right? But I mean, everybody on this call knows this. I mean, you read a good novel or a bad novel, there are moments of illumination. You know that. You watch a good TV show, you watch a bad TV show, there are moments of illumination, right? You have a pleasant experience or you have a painful experience. There are moments of illumination. Why? And this, I will stop, Alex, I promise. This is the last word, and this will be where we begin next week. Why? Because it's all God. You too.
It's kind of funny because Maimonides is the guy who said that people who only follow the rules, and he kind of called them ignoramuses. So if you only follow the rules and there's nothing beyond that, there's no philosophy or anything like that. But then he kind of gets very systematic. So,
well, we contain multitudes.
Awesome.
Okay, all right. See you next week.